So welcome to Thought for the Day on Friday. I just thought we'd reflect quickly on modern Jerusalem. There's a cat sculpture there by the side of the road, and you'll see these works of art dotted around in the modern part. So often tourists stay in the old city and don't really get in to see modern Jerusalem, which in many senses is like many other modern cities across the world. The most popular housing here is apartments. I shot this early in the morning, so not much traffic about, but the skyline there with the high rises, and there's the light rail and a lovely sculpture coming up outside the Hebrew University. And you will find, not so as common as elsewhere, even pets such as dogs. Reflecting on Jerusalem is actually very helpful as we consider the passage from today's communion service from the book of Leviticus, the Old Testament reading. And as usual, if you want to look at that passage, please feel free to pause the video and check out the verses below. It's quite a long passage, but really worth looking at in depth if you have the time later on. This section of Leviticus is dealing with the festivals the Lord commands the people of Israel to keep. 3 particular festivals are mentioned, and they're called the 3 pilgrim festivals, and they are Pesach, which is Passover, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, we don't have time to go into all those festivals now. Suffice to say, it was not just an expectation, but a commandment that the people of Israel, and that's all the people, would come before the Lord into his presence. For some of those festivals, bring their offering to him as well. And so that they would come together to where his presence was. Now, by the time of Jesus, the theology of the time, the understanding of the rabbis was that the very presence, the very essence of God, the Shekinah of God, rested in the temple. And so, 3 times a year, they were in effect commanded to go to Jerusalem and to make their offering and to worship God there. We know if we look at the early chapters of Jesus' life in the Gospels that his parents seem to be extremely devout. They go up for these pilgrim festivals. They go up to offer the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. And so Jesus comes from a very pious and observant family. It wasn't true for all the people at the time. Why was that? Well, to go to Jerusalem was expensive. It was a long journey for some, remember, no cars, no trains, and also it was at times dangerous, and so people would go in groups. So by the time of Jesus, we know that many people wouldn't go up for each of these festivals. They might go up for 1 a year, some would go up every other year, and so on. Only the really devout went up every year, 3 times a year, for Passover, for the Feast of Weeks, and for the Feast of Tabernacles. Now that makes me think about our observance of going up to present ourselves before the Lord. In the 4th century, the church actually made a commandment, a ruling, that Sunday was to be a day of solemnity, of holy obligation, where Christians were commanded to come to church and to worship. Now, that still exists in some denominations in the world, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, where there is that ruling, that law, that Catholics must go to Mass every Sunday. In other denominations, that may not exist, or it may exist to some degree or another, but there is certainly a firm expectation that people will go up to their place of worship on Sunday to come before the Lord. What do people think about that? How would you feel if you're in a denomination or a church where there's not that requirement to go to church every Sunday? How would you feel if suddenly your pastor, your priest, your minister turned round to you and said, "From now on, I feel the Lord has said, like the pilgrim festivals in the Old Testament, now you must come to church every Sunday without excuse and without fail"? How would you feel about that? Would you see it as an infringement on your freedom, on your liberties? Would you see it as a good thing that actually there was this firm expectation? For those of denominations where it is a requirement, Many don't see it as a burden, but as a gift. They see that ruling, that understanding of the importance of coming into God's presence, not as something that, it's a chore or it's a hardship for life, but actually an excuse to escape the realities of the world and to come into God's presence and just rest in it and worship. Now, of course, there will be some who see it as, I've got to go to church on a Sunday, and it's getting in the way of their daily life. But actually, for many, they see it as a rule of life that helps them in their relationship with God. Should we be doing the same? In Jewish law, the Sabbath is a day of rest and of worship of the Lord. And that's a commandment, it's not a choice. If you come to Israel, you'll hear in Jerusalem on Friday evenings around 6:30, 7 o'clock, depending on the time of year, sirens blasting out. And they're telling everyone Shabbat, the Sabbath, has begun. It's lovely to hear, and every time I hear it here, it's a privilege. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. There's a siren announcing the beginning of the Shabbat. But it reminds everyone the Sabbath has begun. We've entered into the Sabbath, and this is a time for God. This is a time for family. Everything shuts down, and people spend that time, as commanded, doing those things. I think as Christians we could learn a lot from that, and from the early church's understanding that actually Sunday is not a day where we pick and choose whether we go to church or not, if we feel like it or if we don't feel like it. Actually, how about if we all made a rule of life that actually Sunday is going to be the day that we are going to go, unless something drastic happens or something prevents us from going, that we are going to go and we are going to commit to giving that day to the Lord. In society in England, until very recently, perhaps the last 50 years, most people would go to church or certainly take it as a day of rest. How about we try and bring that back into our own lives, to have a day which is dedicated where, like the pilgrim festivals of old, we come into God's presence, we sit and we simply worship. Perhaps we'll understand then, and perhaps we'll find as well, that those occasions for us in the busyness of daily life will be a gift and a time of blessing and thankfulness. God bless you. Amen.